Well, that's a sample of the politicking on Parliament Hill this week. None of the opposition parties support the Liberal government, but 2 out of 3 of them won't force an election. So is all that bluster on Parliament Hill a result of winds of change blowing across the country, or are Canadians not really in the mood for an election right now? Joining me now with the pulse of the people is Nik Nanos, Chief Data Scientist and founder of Nanos Research. Welcome back to Power Play. Thanks for being here, Nik.
Great to join you.
So what are the numbers telling you right now about how anxious Canadians are or aren't about having an election?
Well, you know what? If you happen to be part of the blue team, like that 42% of Canadians that support Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives, you are hot for an election.
Right.
How's that? If you're not, then you're not. How's that? You know, the reality is in a survey that we completed just before the New Democrats pulled the plug, or actually, I think we're supposed to say ripped up.
They say ripped up. Okay, yeah, I mean, I don't know if there was actually any
whatever.
tearing of the agreement, but either way, yeah.
Yeah, plunger or whatever.
Yeah.
Anyways, we tested on whether people wanted the coalition to continue to avoid an election or go into an election. People were more likely to want to avoid an election at this time. But the thing is that's not a surprise because 60% of Canadians are not voting for the Conservatives. So, you know, right now at least, for those Canadians that want change, they very much want change in an election. But the reality is that's still a minority of Canadians at this time.
And are you seeing that reaction when you say the people who want change? Is it, as you described it, red hot, that they desperately want that change? And, you know, were you able to sort of measure how badly people actually want to go to the polls?
It just sounds really weird when you kind of say.
When I say it, when I put it that way, yeah. It's
how badly do you want an election?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's not the way we usually do our survey questions.
Well, you ask somewhat and very much agree with it.
Yeah, actually, there are regional variations.
Yeah.
You know, that if we get into the prairie provinces especially, if we get Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba to a lesser extent, but Alberta and Saskatchewan especially, they very much would like to see an election, much more so than provinces like Atlantic Canada and even Ontario to a lesser extent. So think of it as a lot of regional variations on the appetite for an election.
So just for your next poll, maybe you start, you know, on a gradient, white hot or red hot. No, okay, I'm kidding.
Sure, you just pop by the office.
Yeah. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about the next time you're on. I'm kidding. As you said, Conservatives very healthy lead over the Liberals, though. But sometimes when there is a sentiment of change out there, people still don't want to go into an election, and sometimes they penalize the party that triggers that election. Do you see that at all in the numbers? Do you see that in the sentiment of people?
Well, you know, the thing is that people, when an election is called and someone triggers an election, usually there's a gripe. Why don't we call it week one gripe week, where people are complaining about being an election, and then it's usually a short-term phenomenon. There have been exceptions, though. David Peterson, Liberal Premier, called an early election, had a snap election, and was punished for that. But, you know, generally what we see is people get over the election once it's called. You know, in this particular case, the Conservatives are at 42, the Liberals are at 25, the NDP are at 22 in the Nanos tracking. It's pretty clear that the Conservatives would like to see an election as soon as possible because, you know, they need to strike while the iron's really hot.
Right.
And, you know, if the economy improves, it might give the Liberals a little better chance, but right now they're fighting a really strong mood for change. It's very difficult to turn that around.
Especially when you consider there can be some perceived momentum that maybe the Liberals are either trying to stop on the part of the Conservatives. I want to talk a little bit about available voter pool, because oftentimes that's what you guys are measuring as well.
Yeah.
How much of that is expanding or shrinking for the Liberals in terms of likelihood of being able to even expand their percentage?
Yeah, what's interesting is that when you look at the proportion of Canadians that would consider voting for the Liberal Party of Canada from 2015 to like this week, there's been a massive, can we use the word shrinkage?
We just did.
Okay.
We just did.
In a political sense. There's been a massive decline in the proportion of Canadians who would consider voting Liberal, like from anywhere between around 55% of Canadians, which is significant, back in 2015, down to now, you know, at around 40% or thereabouts, which means that what's happened is Justin Trudeau has taken a big tent party that's been in the middle and made it a smaller tent over the course of his tenure as leader of the Liberal Party of Canada. And it just makes it much more difficult for the Liberals because they've got to do a lot more work to get out the vote. Now, the good news for the Liberals is that The voter pool for the Liberals is about the same as for the New Democrats, at about 4 and 10. The Conservatives is a little higher, but the thing is for the Liberals, one of the biggest and most important trend lines is that fewer people are even open to voting Liberal today as they were back in 2015.
And is that a leadership issue or a party issue?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think it's the fact that the leader is perceived of as being tired, and the party has been in power for a long time, and people are just not looking at them as a viable option.
Okay, we're going to leave it there. Nik Nanos of Nanos Research, thanks so much.